July 2021. Please use the Q&A box to submit questions or comments, and Julieta will try to address those later after her presentation. Julieta, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and for everyone who's joining us today. Can others see the presentation? I can't see it myself, but maybe it's just me.
Sorry, we're trying something a little bit different this time. Let me see if I can adjust it.
Okay, well, I can start while we're working on that. So as Ellen mentioned, I'm here from Propel, and for those of you who aren't familiar, we're a company that builds modern, respectful, effective technology that helps low-income Americans improve their financial health. So as she also mentioned, our app is called Providers, although it was formerly known as Fresh EBT. We just launched Providers essentially last month. This month, we're still in the transition period. And we built on the core functionality of Fresh EBT, which was, excuse me, EBT card balance checking. And with Providers are now adding a free debit product in recognition that for income limited Americans, it's not just government benefits that help them make it through the month, but essentially a number of different sources of income. So we're now the only app where people can manage government benefits and banking side by side. And it's especially relevant and important right now, we believe, to have this functionality because there have been many new cash benefits reaching families, such as the child tax credit payments, which I'm going to talk about more towards the end of the presentation. So our over 5 million users are in all 50 states and territories. We estimate that about 2 million Americans use the Providers app each day. We estimate that we reach about 1 in 4 of the households that are on SNAP, although our users are a little bit different from the SNAP population in general. 83% of our users are women, and about 55% we estimate live with children under 18. So the survey that I'll be talking about today was conducted for the first 2 weeks of July, and it was a random sample of a little over 5,500 of our over 5 million users. And all the respondents are EBT card holders. So 4 main findings that I'm going to cover today are first, that we're finding that our users are experiencing more housing instability than ever before. We've been tracking this for some time. We can really make apples to apples comparisons for almost a year, since September 2020. And we're seeing the highest levels of housing instability. Second, that for the users of ours that are receiving increased SNAP benefits above their baseline amount, which is the vast majority now, that they do experience lower levels of food insecurity as compared to those who don't report receiving those benefits. Third, that unfortunately many of our users that are eligible for the child tax credit have not heard of it. And there are some racial disparities there. And that finally, another metric that we've been following for some time regarding borrowing and using credit has reached its highest level since January. So as many users are borrowing or using credit to cover their expenses the last month as they were in January, when we perceived the economic situation as a result of the pandemic to be really at its worst. So getting into that first finding about housing instability, 11.6% of users say they're living in unstable housing, and that's the highest level we've ever reported. Only a little over 41% say that they paid July rent on time. And we've also asked users about applying for and receiving rental assistance since March 2020, and only 17% of the survey respondents reported receiving rental assistance since then. There's a user quote I have on the slide, which you can't see, so I'll read it for you. This is from one of our users from Oklahoma. They say, "I have no water in my home. A neighbor lets me fill bottles with her outside tap. I gave her a bed and frame so she wouldn't have to sleep on the floor anymore. She was homeless with her 2 children. We help each other." And I included this here because we really get thousands of open-ended responses to our open-ended questions and surveys each month, and we get consent from users to share their words, if they choose to. And this quote for me showed what we've seen as trends, throughout the years really that we've been talking to our users, that when the social safety net doesn't provide, they kind of, people's social networks become their social safety net, right? People help one another despite really experiencing very difficult situations. And they shouldn't have to, frankly, but the generosity is really astounding. To go in a little more depth in terms of this housing crisis that our users seem to be experiencing at this time, we also see that those of our users who are not white are disproportionately affected. So I'll just share a few points here on that. Black, Latinx, Native American, and Asian users were more likely to think they wouldn't be able to stay in their current housing for the next 30 days as compared to users who identified as white. Black respondents were also almost twice as likely to have had their utilities shut off in the past 30 days. That was 12% of Black respondents versus 7% of those who identified as white. Black respondents were also more likely to have been evicted in the past month, I believe we asked them. And that rate's pretty low, but still quite a bit higher, with 1.2% for Black respondents and 0.5% for white respondents. Native American users also were significantly more likely to have spent at least one night in a shelter in the past 30 days. That's almost 9% of Native respondents versus 4% of those who identify as white. And finally, that we saw the Latinx survey respondents were the least likely to have received rental assistance since March 2020. Only 9% of them reported that versus almost 13% of those who identify as white. I'm going to keep going here. In terms of the question of finding around food insecurity, as I said, a majority of our users report getting increased SNAP benefits, right? More food benefits than their baseline. In fact, 84% of people reported that, compared to those who say they aren't getting any additional SNAP benefits. So those who receive no additional SNAP benefits, oh, it looks like the slides are here. Sorry, those who received no additional SNAP benefits were more likely to have skipped meals in the last 30 days, eaten less, relied on others for meals, report not having most things that they need in their home, spent over $300 in the past month on food, beyond their benefits, and also report having $25 or less on hand at the moment. Okay, so I'm on slide 10 right now.
Just tell me when.
Yeah, just one more slide, actually. Ooh, if you go back to the one before, so I did skip over a couple of more user quotes. I'll let you read them. Okay, we can move on to the next slide now, I think. Okay, so this is what I was just sharing. And I think you can move to the next slide now as well. So as you can see here are a couple of more responses from our users that illustrate the impact that receiving a boost in SNAP means for families that have been struggling for some time. Okay, next slide, please. So the third main finding, as I said, pertains to the child tax credit, and we're finding that many eligible users, and we're defining eligible here as those who report having dependents in the home that are under 18. So many of them have still not heard of the child tax credit. In this July survey, 26% of users said they had not heard of the child tax credit, which, as many of you know, would provide $250 to $300 per month per child from July through December, which, as you can tell from the findings that I've shared up to this point, would be really quite critical for most of our users who are in, if not in an acute housing situation, perhaps struggling to eat or just cover their bills, keep their utilities from being shut off. Now, we've been doing quite a bit of research with regard to the child tax credit recently, and we've actually seen the portion of eligible users who say they've heard of the child tax credit fluctuate. We've seen it be as high as 90% of people we survey having heard of it, to as low as 74%, such as in this particular July survey. And we think some of that variation has to do with the way we word the question and timing of the survey, but we have seen a consistent trend of, first asking people if they've heard of the tax credit, and then if they think they're eligible, and there's always like quite a bit of drop off between the two. So perhaps people have some understanding, but those who actually think that they're eligible and would like pursue receiving it if they haven't seems to be low, and there's quite a bit of room for improvement there. I wanted to highlight here too that in particular respondents who identify as Latinx are significantly less likely to have heard of the child tax credit as compared to other groups, or to think that they're eligible to receive it. Well, it's only 67% had heard of the tax credit, and 51% thought that they were eligible to receive it. So there's a lot of room to improve awareness there. And then I'm going to talk more about the child tax credit in a little bit, but I just want to finish out the last of kind of the top line insights from this July survey. If you go to the next slide, please. Oh, sorry. I also have a little bit more from our users in their own words about, we asked them what they planned or hoped to do with that first payment. And here you see again, like really just going throughout all of the open responses from this month, lots of stories about people struggling with housing. Next slide, please. Okay, so the last point I wanted to make here is just that we're seeing people who reported borrowing or using credit to cover their expenses in the last month reach its highest level since January. So 63% of, and in particular, people with children under 18 have always been more likely to say that they had to borrow or use credit to cover their expenses. And in July, 55% of respondents without children said that they had to do this, and 63% of those who do have kids under 18 said the same. So again, highlighting the importance of these cash payments to families. Next slide, please. Okay, getting to the child tax credit a little bit more and then taking your questions. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So we use this new sort of survey, at least for these purposes, in our app. So it's called a modal survey, essentially. About, I think, a week after July 15th, when the first payments went out for the child tax credit, we users who reported having children under 18 when they, go on the app, we asked them that question. They got a pop-up survey that simply asked them, like, did you receive the child tax credit payment? It was slightly different than this because there was like, yes, by direct deposit, yes, by mail check, no, and I'm not sure. Those were the answer options. We saw that 79% of people overall reported receiving the July payment. 70% of those received it via, overall 70% received it via direct deposit and 9% reported getting it by check in the mail. 14% said they hadn't received it, and another 8% were not sure if they'd received it. So in our minds, this is sort of setting a benchmark for us in our efforts to get more people signed up and to really ensure that we expand access and uptake of the tax credit as much as possible. So this is our benchmark, and we are going to plan to continue tracking it after every payment goes out. Next slide, please. We're also carrying out a project over the course of the 7 months that these advance payments are going to go out. Well, 6 months the advance payments are going to go out, and into January of next year when people need to claim the other half through their 2021 taxes. So we're following 10 families who have children who are eligible for the child tax credit. 7 of the 10 families that we have in this project reported receiving the July payment. Those who got it reported spending the money on clothes and school supplies for their children. So this kind of back to school timing was really top of mind for people. And in addition, we actually had about 2 or 3 people whose children, at least one child of theirs, had a birthday in around July, second half of July or early August. And they talked about being able to throw a party or otherwise celebrate their kids' birthdays. However, among the 3 people who hadn't received their payment, one of those mothers also had a child who had a birthday, a daughter who was actually turning 16 in early August. And she told us, you know, I had to tell my daughter, I'm sorry, like we don't have any money to celebrate. And one of the other mothers who didn't get the payment, you know, talked to us about struggling to get school supplies for her kids. She managed to cover the cost of that without getting the child tax credit. But we asked her, you know, what happens if you can't pay for the supplies for your kids? Like, what happens when they get to school and they don't have them? And she told us, well, they get their first 0 of the school year. And, you know, it was kind of a shocking revelation that, you know, children are essentially punished in school for not being able to arrive with something that's can be quite a burden financially to their children. Next slide, please. So we are taking a number of measures to try to expand awareness and access to the child tax credit. We have in the providers app, which is something we had in Fresh EBT before, what we call the benefits hub, which is where people can see updates on their benefits and other programs that are available to help them. We have, you know, a section on the child tax credit, which has a lot of details. Also has this calculator that you can see here, in which we help people estimate what their payment is, and then tell them when payments come through, and then also link them to how to sign up or where to manage their payments. We've also been working on trying to make those portals to sign up and to manage your payments as user-friendly as possible, especially for people using mobile phones, kind of trying to prepare people with what they're going to need to complete those processes, but also adjusting the IRS portals to be more mobile friendly in size. So you don't have to sort of, you know, pinch and zoom to use those. Next slide, please. We also launched, I shared this last month, childtaxcredit.com, which is a more external facing resource for people to learn about the tax credit and sign up for it. And I want to add one last thing, which I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about housing, is that we've also partnered with the administration to share access to this emergency rental assistance tool created by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which maybe you've seen it, is a page where you can essentially look up like your state, your county, and see where the rental assistance program and how to apply to it. So that's something we've been sharing in-app pretty prominently, and sort of tracking users clicking on it and connecting with it. So I think that's all I have. Let me check the chat for questions that might be coming through.
So Julieta, there's one that's probably pretty quick to answer, which is any chance that there's a link to the benefits hub that you could share? So it sounds like people might want access as separate from the app.
You know, I don't know that I can actually share a link to it if you don't have the app. I can look into that though.
Okay. And
sorry about that. I don't think it's something I can share right now, but
sure. And there's some technical questions with respect to any way to compare this presentation to track over time so that people get a sense of longitudinal data. Look at the previous presentations. I know you have some information up on your website on the monthly surveys. And that same questioner would be interested in knowing the exact questions you're asking. And that may have been prompted in part because you're noting some differences in responses to some questions depending on the wording and the timing. So any more, I guess I would say, technical detail with respect to the survey itself?
So if you go to the next slide, I think, yes, my email is there. So please feel free to email me. We don't share the questions that we ask anywhere in particular, but any kind of data point that I talk about changing over time, we ask the question pretty consistently in the same manner. So I'm happy to share that with anyone one-on-one who's interested. And you know, in previous presentations, I have maybe talked more about trends when I think they're relevant. But if you go to this page, this URL here, joinpropel.com/learn, you can actually see basically what I just presented, maybe a little more succinctly there. And we're publishing every month's insights on that one page. So you can also look at previous months and see sort of what have been the top, you know, takeaways from a given month. But there's a lot of information, right? And we get a lot of responses every month. I think we're feel very honored that people spend the time, our users spend the time to complete the surveys and share with us. And we do these webinars to share that. We share it on the website, but there's still always like more there, right? So any specific questions I can make time to ask. And also on that page, you'll see that we've been writing kind of more in-depth pieces, focusing on a particular topic, drawing on some of like all of this data that we have, right? And yes, my contact email is right here. It's Julieta@joinpropel.com.
And Julieta, there's also a question about whether or not you think there's that it's a widespread problem that people who are eligible haven't received the tax credit. Do you have any thoughts on why they wouldn't have?
I mean, I think that it is. I think that it is not just limited to our users, and even if it is, I mean, you know, we have over 5 million users, and if say half of them are eligible, which about roughly we think are eligible, you know, 14% aren't getting reported not getting the child tax credit. That's a substantial portion of people, right? So yes, I think it's a problem beyond just what I'm presenting. And in terms of why eligible households wouldn't have received the tax credit, we've been doing some research on this, and what I can say is there's a portion of people who have not taken the steps they need to take to get the tax credit, right? You need to have filed 2020 taxes, that is filed taxes this year, or filed taxes last year. And in the absence of not having done either of those things, used the so-called non-filer portal either last fall to receive your stimulus payment, or more recently when it was reopened to actually like sign up for the child tax credit payments. We estimated that about like 12.5% of our users hadn't done that, right? So that covers most of that 14% who haven't gotten the payments. And the remainder who haven't gotten it, we're really not sure why. Some people have been telling us that, the IRS is delayed in processing taxes, so they may have filed taxes and are still waiting to even get their tax refunds. So there's some of that happening. I don't know. There are other, I would think, glitches maybe that we're not really sure what the cause of them are, but a substantial portion of the people who haven't gotten the tax credit is because they haven't filed taxes or done like this non-filer portal process. And there, we think some portion of those, substantial portion of those people, haven't filed taxes because they don't have any earned income. And the stimulus payment was sort of, or the stimulus payments, I should say, was like a new factor, and it did cause a lot of people, as far as we can tell in our research, to file taxes for the first time in like many years. But people who receive Social Security payments didn't have to take any additional steps to get stimulus payments. They do to get the child tax credit payments, and we suspect that that population in particular is one that's sort of part of this missing piece. The other thing is that we definitely have been talking to people, some of the participants in that study I was telling you, where we're following 10 families, may not have Social Security numbers. They file taxes with ITINs, but their kids have Social Security numbers. And there's a lot of misunderstanding and among that population. They weren't eligible to get the first stimulus payments, for example. They are eligible for the child tax credit payments, but we think that there's a disconnect there, and that there's also a strong correlation in that population and people who don't speak English. So that's sort of the other subset that we think may be missing out as of right now. But we're, working with partners, partners in the federal government, and really on our own to try to see what we can do to increase uptake, and specifically targeting some of those populations that we think make up, a big portion of those who didn't get that first payment.
Yeah. Julieta, thank you so much for this, both for the time you take and the work that you do in getting this information. But of course, as you acknowledged, it's really the subscribers to your app who are responding and sharing this important information and giving us some insights. It's particularly important, I think, for those of us who work on benefits, that there are things we can do to affect the outcome on these surveys in the future. We can help get people to be more aware of what they might be eligible for and help connect them. And given the struggles that people have, it would be a shame to allow child tax credit or the rental assistance not to be claimed and not to be able to help people. So we appreciate what you're doing. And again, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm going to turn it to Nomi to wrap us up.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today. For those of you who want access to the slides or want to view this again, we'll be uploading it to the FRAC YouTube channel, and we'll include a link in the description with the slides if you want to cross-reference with what Julieta was saying, because I know that we had some technical difficulties. And with that, I hope that everybody has a good afternoon or morning, and thank you all for joining us.